first of all, I want to thank everyone. I'm Lisa Torgerson. I'm the Director of our Leisure Travel Services here at Travelex International. And we're continuing our Travelex Travel Talk series, and we're going to highlight one of my favorite destinations, which is New Zealand. And I had the opportunity to visit New Zealand about a year and a half ago, and I left a totally changed person. So, I thank Peter for that. But I want to introduce Peter. Peter is with Southern World, and he is exclusively who I work with for my Australia and New Zealand trips that I plan for our clients. So, Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you because you can talk best about New Zealand. And the one thing I want to mention, there is a chat box that you can type in questions. And, Peter, would you like to answer those as we go along, or would you like to answer them at the end?
Yeah, probably the end would be would be easier to do, I think.
Okay, perfect. So if you want to type your question in there at the end of Peter's presentation, then he will answer those questions. And Peter, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to quickly say that if I am lisping or sounds like I'm slurring my words, I've got a very large Vicks vapor drop in my mouth, and I've been struggling with a cold and a cough, so I first of all want to excuse myself from that. So good evening, folks. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Peter Askin. I'm one of the principals of a company called Southern World, and we are the destination management company that looks after Lisa's clients in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. So thanks for joining us. What we're going to do over the next little while is sort of explore New Zealand. I'm going to describe a suggested itinerary from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island. It's sort of a 21-day itinerary. And we're going to look at various options for touring New Zealand and how to get to New Zealand. So let's get going. So Kiwis are a pretty friendly group. The country's a very multicultural, multinational mix of what I call fun people. It's a very relaxed country, and you'll always find Kiwis welcoming. So it's interesting, if you're flying from Chicago and you're on an Air New Zealand flight, because you can fly from Chicago direct into Auckland now, your holiday basically starts the moment you hop on that aircraft. And you'll get that vibe immediately that Kiwis really are a fun and welcoming group. A lot of what happens in the tourism industry in New Zealand is in the outdoors. We're definitely an adventure playground. And whilst we have some amazing cities and towns to explore, there's lots of opportunities to get away from it all. So this was a map that we brought out last year with the flights that you can fly from the USA to New Zealand. Note when you leave the States to go to New Zealand, if you leave on a Monday, you get there on a Wednesday. So there is a day sort of lost in space. All good if you've got a birthday on that day and it's not a birthday you want to have. On the return journey, you gain that day back. So, for instance, if you leave on a Monday coming back, you arrive back in the States on Monday before you've actually left New Zealand in real time. So, like if it's your birthday, you kind of get two birthdays on the day of departure and on the day of arrival. So it's a little bit of a weird phenomena traveling to and from the South Pacific. You can see the flight times. Having the Chicago-Auckland flight is just wonderful for me. I've lived in the States now for 32 years. And originally when I would go home, I would have to fly Chicago to Denver, to Honolulu, to Nandi, Fiji, to Auckland. now I can hop on an aircraft and be there basically within 15 to 16 hours in either direction. So it's a wonderful change for me. This new slide is there purely to let you know that Air New Zealand are going to start flying late next year from New York into Auckland as well. So if you've got family or friends that you'd be travelling with, they can physically fly direct from that long distance as well. So a little bit about New Zealand itself. New Zealand is about the same size as Japan, about the same size as California. It's 1,000 miles from Cape Reinga at the north to Bluff at the very bottom near Stewart Island there. So it's an easy country to get around. You can see the flight times, not a great deal of flight time between Auckland and Queenstown, and obviously some of the shorter distances to some of the other tourist stops. It's very much a self-drive destination if you're okay with driving on the other side of the road. So that's kind of how I've developed the itinerary that we'll go through shortly. But there are many other ways of getting around, whether it's having your own driver guide, whether it's being on a coach tour, whether it's doing short hops with flights and doing day tours from the centres that you're at. Obviously, we're at the other end of the world, so the opposite seasons to what we have here. I grew up in the South Island of New Zealand, so you can see the winter temperatures that we have there between June and August, between 35 and 60. You'd wake up to a frost in the morning, and by lunchtime it would be sort of mid-50s to 60s. So nothing like the winters we have here, and the summers aren't as extreme either. So it really is a year-round destination. If you are traveling in the winter months and the early spring and late fall, it's a really good, quiet time to visit New Zealand, rather than the high season between sort of November to April is basically our high season. So I started this itinerary in Auckland. That's the up until now, that is the only international gateway we have from the United States. American Airlines is going to start flying into Christchurch from LA next year, which is will open up the gateway into the South Island a little bit more. But otherwise, every other international flight will come into Auckland. Certainly, if you're coming from Australia, you can fly into Auckland or Rotorua or Wellington or Christchurch, and I think even Dunedin is now an international airport. So when we fly to the South Pacific, whether it's Australia or New Zealand, generally the flights are going to leave in the evening, and you'll fly through the night. Obviously, you'll have that lost day in space, and you'll arrive in New Zealand in the very early hours, meaning somewhere between 5:30 and 7:30 New Zealand time. So the majority of the time, the best thing is to get a pre-night, have a room waiting for you, and be able to check in and freshen up. The last thing you want to do when you arrive in New Zealand after an international flight is, get to your hotel and think, good Lord, I'm a little tired, I might take a nap. We recommend that you're going to get a few hours sleep on the flight, so you want to freshen up and then make sure you've got something active to do during the rest of the day. That being the case, we've organised on this particular itinerary the fact that you'd go out to the western beaches of New Zealand, and this is a tour out to the Waitakere Ranges and the beaches by the Tasman Sea. If any of you watched the movie The Piano and the black sand beach that the piano got dropped off on, well, that's in this very area. Auckland's one of the few major cities of the world that actually has two ports, one on each coast. So it has a port on the Tasman Sea and a port on the Pacific side as well. Auckland, if I go back and show you that slide again, Auckland is known as the City of Sails. It's a huge, huge yachty town. You can see a few masts there. We will host the America's Cup in 2021. Auckland is also the largest city by far in New Zealand. There's approximately 5 million people reside in New Zealand, and a third of them live in the greater Auckland area. So the idea was to spend a couple of nights in Auckland. On the next day, we're going to take a short ferry trip out to Waiheke Island, and this is within view of downtown Auckland. It's very much used to be a hippie commune. It is now sort of the home of the very rich and wealthy and people who've retired there, and some who commute backwards and forwards to Auckland as well. It's full of olive groves, vineyards, amazing restaurants. So it's a good day trip to go out there and enjoy the excuse me, the food and wine of Waiheke Island. So that's your second day in New Zealand, and then the next day we're going to start the journey. Here we go. Start the journey. Pick up your rental car in Auckland, and we're going to take a drive south to Hobbiton. And for those of you who don't recognise this little tiny little house on the side of a hill, it is the film set for the trilogy of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. It's set on a 1,250-acre farm. It is exactly the way it was during the movie. It's one of the very few movie sets that's been kept in commission anywhere in the world. So you get to see the opportunity to see just what the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings was all about. The pub's still there. Everything's just as pristine as it was in the movie. So it's a fascinating little day trip to do that. You do that on the way to Rotorua. The other option is, if you're not a Lord of the Rings fan, is to go via Waitomo and do one of the cave trips, the many cave trips, which you can do a little boat trip, you can do a walking tour, you can do some blackwater rafting through the glowworms, but that is a traditional New Zealand iconic thing to do when you're visiting our country. If you had time and you were adding, if you're adding a day to the tour, you can possibly do both of these exceptional sites. But on this particular itinerary, it's sort of a one or the other. But everything we do is customized, so nothing I'm talking about today is set in stone. So the ultimate is to get to Rotorua. Rotorua is our geothermal area of New Zealand. We're going to spend 2 nights there. There are lots of options, whether it's Māori culture, whether it's geothermal activity, whether it's going to extinct volcanoes. There is plenty to do in this little town, and I have a few of those options here at the thermal park tour at Waimangu. A must-do is experience the Māori culture, especially to eat their hangi food. A hangi is the Māori equivalent of the Polynesian or the Hawaiian luau. That's cooked above the ground, and the hangi is cooked below the ground. A little bit south of there, about an hour drive, is Lake Taupo, and we're going to spend just a night there. The main attraction there being Lake Taupo itself, and to do a cruise on the largest crater lake in the world. And as you can see there's some very ancient Māori rock art carved into the face of that rock. From there we have another little short drive, and that's the good thing about New Zealand, is that to get anywhere between these wonderful locations, you're not spending excuse me, hours in a car. It's a relatively short drive, 2 hours to Napier, and we're going to spend 2 nights at Craggy Range. This is a spectacular vineyard, one of my wife's favourite Sauvignon Blancs, but they grow some amazing Chardonnay grapes there, as well as some pretty good Merlot as well. Napier Hawke's Bay is more known for its Chardonnay and its lighter reds, and the Sauvignon Blanc grape that they use there is actually grown in the Marlborough region. But you stay at Craggy Range, and the next day you're out on a full day wine tour, 5 to 6 vineyards, including lunch, and sampling many other different vineyards, as I said. So we check our rental car in, and we head south to Wellington. Just a very short flight from Napier down to Wellington, and we're spending another couple of nights there. We've made this more of a 2 sort of free days, the day of arrival and the next day, for you to pick and choose what you want to do there. Wellington is an incredibly cool city. It's got a major cafe culture. It's definitely a foodie city. It's our national capital. Like Chicago, it's known as the Windy City for the same 2 reasons Chicago is windy, because it's the seat of power in politics, and it's also incredibly windy from the prevailing winds. Not a very large city, easy to get around. We have the National Museum, Te Papa, which is a little bit akin to the Museum in DC, so it's a very modern, interactive museum. And it's also home to Weta Studios. So Weta is the movie studio where The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, many of James Cameron's movies, who actually spends half his year living in the Wellington region. He has a major cattle station about 30 miles from downtown Wellington. So that's a very cool thing to do either a behind-the-scenes tour of Te Papa, or to go to the Weta Studios. But as I said, it is also has a wonderful food culture, and lost my mouse here. So that's Te Papa, and then we have a little walking tour, exploring the cafes and the restaurants. So that's something else that you can book whilst you're in Wellington. Because this is a self-drive itinerary, we're going to go between the 2 islands on the inter-island ferry. You physically don't take your car on board anymore. If you've had a rental car on the North Island, you leave it at the wharf there, hop on the ferry, and sail across to the South Island and pick up another rental car there. So you won't have had a rental car in Wellington, so you'll just pick up your rental car over in Picton, and then head out about a half-hour drive from the wharf to Blenheim. Blenheim is the home, or Marlborough is the home of the Sauvignon Blanc. So there are literally scores of unbelievable vineyards in that region. We're going to stay in another little vineyard, in a nice little hotel within the vineyard. You've got that day free, and then the next day is a full-day vineyard tour. And we also do a really cool sort of Sauvignon Blanc mussel cruise out on the Queen Charlotte Sound as a touring option for the next day. From there, again, a nice little 2-hour drive for another 2-night stay over in Nelson, very close to the Abel Tasman National Park. The beaches there are just absolutely stunning. You can see the white sandy beaches. You can see the beautiful blue ocean. It's known for its day walks. So we are going to do a day walk on the Abel Tasman National Park. And this is actually a walk and sea kayak day. There are many different options. So if sea kayaking is not your thing, you can see it's very, very calm there. But there are other options just to do pure walks, or you can cruise up and down the Abel Tasman as well. So from there, we're going to head further south to the Queenstown Fiordland area. I'll just take a glass of water. So we're going to fly into Queenstown, pick up a rental car, about another hour and a half to Lake Wanaka, a beautiful little glacier-fed lake, and spend a couple of nights there. The next day, we do another little bit of an adventure encounter, more of a nature encounter this time by 4-wheel drive in a very pristine area around Mount Aspiring National Park. New Zealand is famous for its birding. We had no natural predators for our bird life. So there were, after the mowers were extinct, there was nothing that would mess with our bird life. So it was very, very strong until, of course, the European settlers came and bought weasels and stoats and things like that. But there's still an amazing bird life after we've sort of controlled that the vermin of today. From there, we head to the real Fiordland area. So we head to Te Anau, spend 2 nights at a lovely lodge in Te Anau called Fiordland Lodge. On the first day, we're going to go to one of 2 fjords, or what we call sounds down there. So the first is a day trip out to Doubtful Sound and spend the day there. Milford is certainly the more well-known of our 2 Fiordland sounds, but this is quieter, a little less touristy, and a great experience to do a day tour. So we'll spend the day there, and then the next day we will leave our rental car at the hotel. So we'll spend 2 nights at that hotel, leave our car there, and we'll be picked up by a small coach, and we'll do a day walk of the famous Milford Track. At the end of that little tramp, as we call them down there, excuse me, we will then head out after all the tourists have left Milford Sound, the literally hundreds and hundreds that come to Milford Sound every day, and we will do an overnight cruise. To be in Milford Sound at night, which I've done a couple of times, is just amazing. This is a natural rainforest, so there is also obviously no unnatural light there, so the night sky is just amazing. This little 5-star boat, I guess small ship, only has about nine cabins, I believe. And so you will enjoy the solitude of Milford Sound on an overnight cruise before being transferred back to your hotel and driving into Queenstown. You have a 3-night stay in Queenstown to finish off the tour. Queenstown is known as some people say the adrenaline capital, some people just say the adventure capital of the world. There is so many wonderful activities that you can do in this spectacular city. It's kind of like Aspen on a lake, but instead of being more of a ski resort that obviously Aspen is and Queenstown is, it really is a 24/7, 365 days a year resort town. It has lots going on. You have bungee jumping, you have jet boating. There's some amazing vineyards in the region, some great Pinots because of the cooler climate down there. So great vineyards, great cycling tours. There's a great cycling tour around the lake, many fine restaurants. So 3-night stay is wonderful. You can actually do way more than that, but that's sort of the way we've finished it up. So just a few slides of some of the activities that you may want to maybe not do, but certainly go and watch. If you're going to skydive anywhere in the world, this is one of the most spectacular ones because you can skydive over 12,000-foot peaks and look out to the probably the Pacific, but definitely the Tasman Sea as well. And there's also some wonderful little areas up in Glenorchy where a lot of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit was filmed. So that is the end of the journey. And as we would say in New Zealand, haere rā. So if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be very happy to answer them. As far as the value of New Zealand, I think the Kiwi dollar at the moment is something like 64 cents to the US dollar, so in great value. So it's a great time to travel. As I said, the seasonality of New Zealand, obviously the high season is the high season for the right reasons because the weather is stunning. But it's also a busy time to go to New Zealand, so don't be afraid to go off-season where it's a little bit quieter, because as I showed you with the temperatures, it is not a cold destination by Chicago strength. So Lisa, do we have any questions?
We're trying to pull them up to see if we can locate the questions. I want to mention something that was a highlight for my visit to New Zealand, and it happened to be in Queenstown. I'm extremely afraid of heights, so I'll preface it that way, and I was really very scared to go in a helicopter. But we did a helicopter to Milford Sound, and I started off in the back of the helicopter. And as we landed on a beach, and then as we were getting back in the helicopter, somebody said, you have to get in the front. So I got in the front of the helicopter, and we landed on a glacier and had a glass of champagne, and it was my favorite part of the entire journey. And we ended with that. So I ended with a bang, as I call it.
One of the cool things that you can do down there, and I'm not sure whether you had the opportunity to there, Lisa, is they quite often take a driver and some biodegradable golf balls, and they set up a little driving platform on the glacier, and you can drive the ball into the Never Never, and it's biodegradable, so completely safe. So that's also a very cool thing to do on some of those helicopter rides. And if we've got any, golfing fans, golf is an everyman sport in New Zealand. There are more golf courses per head of population in New Zealand than anywhere in the world. I come from a little town of 2,000 people. We have a really nice little 9-hole and an 18-hole as well. There are some of the best golf courses in the world with Cape Kidnappers and Kauri Cliffs. but it's also a year-round sport, so you can play golf in the middle of winter when it's ski season in Queenstown. So yes, if you're a golfer, if you're a fisherman, there is wonderful deep sea fishing. There is extraordinary fly fishing and stream fishing in New Zealand. You can't buy a trout or a salmon unless it's farmed in New Zealand. You can only eat it if you have physically caught it. So if you go out fly fishing, catch a nice big brown trout, you can take it back to the restaurant and they will cook it up for you. But you could not physically buy that in a store.
The talk it says. So Pete, we can't locate the question. I saw one question in the Q&A that when you kept mentioning we on all of these tours, is there a dedicated guide is the question?
Not on this particular one. This is a self-drive. But of course, when you're doing the tours, then you have a guide for those tours. So, for instance, if you were doing a behind-the-scenes tour of Te Papa, that would be completely guided. If you were going to the Māori Cultural Centre or doing any of the tours in Rotorua with the geysers and the hot pools, all of those things are toured. But the transportation itself is by yourself. But that whole itinerary we did could have been replicated with a driver guide, or it could have been where some of the transfers were done by helicopter, or they were done by you fly from Auckland to Rotorua, and then or have go on a tour from Auckland to Rotorua on a small luxury coach with 10 or 12 other people and do Waitomo or do Hobbiton. So this was more of a sort of not so much a freewheeling because it is structured, but having your own vehicle to come and go as you please just makes it a little bit more of an FIT. But as I said, when we got to Napier and stayed at the vineyard there, that next day you wouldn't be driving around the vineyards. There was a tour that was going to take you to those vineyards. So those sort of things are organised.
Okay, Peter, there's another question. Any recommendations for activities along the west coast of the South Island in the Southern Alps?
Yes. So that's where we have two of our glaciers. There is Franz Josef and Fox Glacier. So you can do a heli-hike up there. One of the glaciers, I'm not sure which one of it is, you can also do an overnight on the glacier, which is very cool. Obviously weather dependent, but they drop you on the glacier with the required equipment. You do have a guide with you, and you stay in a tented facility on a glacier overnight, about 10,000 feet in the air. So that is just brand new this season. We've got some clients booked on it in February. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, the West Coast is known for its ruggedness. We used to have it's kind of the wild, wild west. And when I was growing up in New Zealand, pubs closed at 6 p.m. And so they sort of had, or 6:30, they sort of had the 6 o'clock swill. And on the West Coast, the pubs never closed. They just pulled down the shutters and the police would just let them be. So it was in the old days the home of the gold miners and the coal miners. But it's renowned for its rainforest. It's one of the very few parts of the world where you've got 12,000-foot mountains rolling down into glaciers rolling down into a rainforest right next door to the ocean. So it's quite spectacular. We are having some little issues at the moment. We've got a few roads that have been washed out in the last few days, but they will be back up by Christmas, thank goodness. But it's a very, very rugged coastline. Lots of ships have been shipwrecked there as they made their way from Australia to New Zealand. So yes, it's based all around the glaciers and the rainforest.
Okay, so Peter, we've unmuted most everyone that's still with us. So if you have a question, please feel free to go ahead and ask Peter any question that you have. Okay, I guess that means you did a really good job, Peter.
Thank you.
No one speaking.
Again, I apologize for my coughing. That was hard not to do.
No, but you know what? Thank you for being a trooper and still joining us for this, because I was very much excited for it. So we really appreciate your time. And, oh, we do have another question. It says, the pictures were spectacular. Do you have a map with the route? Is there a map of the route that you just covered?
Yes, so what we're going to do is we're going to send everybody out a really, really good New Zealand map. Tourism New Zealand does an exceptional job with their information. So we'll send you out a map. We'll also send you out a brochure of other things that you can do in Australia and New Zealand, and the actual itinerary as a document, so that you can look through that. And I'm available. I live in the Chicagoland area. If you ever needed to get in touch with Lisa and I to have a chat about an itinerary, I'm always available to help Lisa with her planning, although she knows almost as much as me now, having been down there and being almost Kiwi.
Without the accent. So, well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. If you do have questions, please feel free. You can email me, which my email address is Lisa, L-I-S-A, and then T as in Tom, at travel, spelled out T-R-A-V-E-L, and then E as in Edward, X as in X-ray, and then the word international.com. So if you think of questions after the webinar tonight, please feel free to email me, and I'm happy to answer them. I do want to mention that Peter is going to be joining us for probably the next 3 months. We're going to cover Australia in the next 3 Travelex Travel Talk series, because Australia is too big to cover in one evening. So, you know, please feel free to join us. We will be sending out invitations for that in the future. But thank you for joining us. And Peter, thank you for spending the time with us. I really appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Oh, wait a minute. There's one more question. Don't go anywhere yet, Peter.
Okay.
It says, do all of your tours offer the choice of Hobbiton or Waitomo? Because he's scheduled on one right now, but he may want to change to the other.
Yes, everything we do is customized, so we can change and manipulate any program. If you were staying in Auckland, for instance, there is a really good operator, even though it's a long day, that does both Hobbiton and Waitomo as a day trip out of Auckland. So if you weren't heading south and you had a spare day in Auckland, you could physically do that as a one-day tour, and you could do it private as well. But there is an operator that does a small group and does it really, really well.
Do you have a preference between the Waitomo or the Hobbiton? Is it more like Hobbiton is for those people who are Lord of the Rings fans?
Yeah, look, they are both incredible in their own way, and there are different ways of doing the Waitomo caves as well. You can do a very sedentary, boat through the caves. They are very original caves. There is another one that's there's 2 different walking tours, and then there are 2 really cool ones that my sons have done a couple of times, where you abseil down into the caves and with tires, and you go through them in sort of blackwater rafting. Very, very safe, very cool. So that's a great thing to do. So there's no way it compares with Hobbiton, but there are some people who don't like being in caves, so they probably wouldn't do that. And then there are people who are just nutty Lord of the Rings fans.
And one of the other questions actually is in regards to the Lord of the Rings. Are there any other tours for the movie sets of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings other than the one that you showed? Are there various tours of that?
Yes, there are. So Queenstown has a myriad of them because, not only Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but what was Mission Impossible? The last Mission Impossible was filmed down there. So Queenstown is full of movie areas. So if you do, say, the Dart River Safari, which is jet boat up the Dart River, you are in the heart of Lord of the Rings country. In Wellington, you can walk around the parks, and there are spots there that were part of Lord of the Rings. So all over the country, where Mount Doom was, where Aragon, not Aragon. Anyway, yeah, there are places all over New Zealand that you can experience Lord of the Rings sites.
Perfect. And then one thing I want to mention for those who are listening, as Peter said, this is all customized. So what I like to do is have a conversation with you at the very beginning to kind of find out your likes and your dislikes so that we can customize your experience in New Zealand to fit what's important to you. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. We want to do it with the way that you want to experience the destination.
I see there's another question there now too.
Oh. Bear with us here for a second. Go to the other question, the question box, the one we had before. No, at the top. Bear with us, Peter. We're getting there. Oh, there we go. Let's see. No, it'd be in the chat box. Go to the chat box. No, it looks like we've got them all unless somebody has asked something that I haven't read so far.
Okay.
So, you want to wait just a minute and see if anybody has any other questions?
Sure.
So if you have a question, you want to type it in the Q&A box. That's where most of the questions are being fielded through. So if you have a question before we end our evening, please type in your question. Otherwise, like I said, I have my email address. You can send me via my email. You can also call me at the office. My direct phone number is 847-519-4773. Or if you are working with one of the advisors with Travelex, please feel free to reach out to them, and we'll make sure that we get your question answered. Okay, if there's no more questions, I want to thank Peter for spending the time with us. And as Peter said, if you would like to have a one-on-one phone call with myself and Peter, we're happy to arrange that. And Peter, I can't thank you enough. I know you're not feeling well and you've been traveling a lot, so thank you for taking the time to spend this evening with us and share New Zealand with our guests.
You're welcome. I'll have a lot more orange juice before the Australian one.
Sounds good. Well, everybody, thanks for coming, and we look forward to our next time with you. So have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.